By the end of 19th century, the anti-colonial struggle had evolved into an international endeavor in which many of the activists envisioned an alternative social order different from the one imposed by British imperialism. The intellectual activists traversed to quite different worlds in search of alternative visions. One such activist enthused by a new world vision was Manavendranath Roy.
Hello, welcome to the new session on M. and Roy, Philosophy of New Humanism. We have with us Dr. M. Ramakrishnan, Professor of Philosophy. Welcome, sir. In this session, we will discuss the philosophy and political ideas of contemporary Indian thinker Manavendranath Roy. To begin with, Professor will present the brief biographical sketch of M. and Roy. Sir.
We shall discuss today the political career and philosophical ideas of the great Indian thinker Manavendranath Roy. The political career of Manavendranath Roy is indeed unbelievable in some cases. His philosophical ideas remain one of the most original ones in contemporary India. Indian philosophy today, that is in the contemporary period, can be classified into spiritualism and materialism. Materialism can further be divided into the Marxist stream of materialism and the non-Marxist stream. Sure, M. N. Roy represents the materialist, non-Marxist scheme of thinking in contemporary India, and that is his distinction today. And the original name of Manavendranath Roy is Narendranath Bhattacharya. He began his political career as a national revolutionary very early at the age of 14. He had been active in the militant organizations like Anushilan Samiti and Jugantar Group in Bengal. He left India in 1915 to collect arms for an uprising against the British rule in India. He went to Java, but his attempt to collect arms failed there, and following that he escaped to the United States of America, where he took refuge in the Stanford University, settled with some of his socialist friends. Roy's collaboration with the socialist friends at Stanford University and his reading of the rich Marxist literature in the New York Public Library actually attracted him to the philosophy of Marxism. And in the United States, he was suspected as a German spy, and he had to flee the US to reach Mexico. And in Mexico, Lenin's emissary Borodin met Roy and discussed for days together. They discussed the problems of ideology, Marxism, political issues, colonial issues, etc. And as a final result of their meeting in Mexico, that is Roy's meeting with Borodin, he was completely changed into the new ideology of Marxism. And on behalf of Lenin, Borodin invited Roy to Soviet Russia, and he reached Soviet Russia and became a very active member of the Communist International since 1920. And he continued in the USSR until he left the country in 1930. And in the Communist International, Roy had been very active in dealing with the colonial problems, that is the relationship between the Communist International, Soviet Communist Party and the communists or the freedom movements in countries like India. And in the meantime, he was able to found the first communist party in India. And what we find, Indian communism today is actually a continuation of his effort to form the first communist party in India. And finally, what happened is, in Soviet Russia, he had a problem with what we today call the colonial problem, that is the communist standpoint over the colonial issues, the relationship between Soviet Communist Party and the colonial freedom movements. And he had a disagreement with Lenin, and it is known as their debate over the colonial question. And in the meantime, there was a section of Indian communists who complained to the Soviet Communist Party about Roy's leadership. Anyway, finally, Roy was expelled from the Communist International in 1929, and he returned to India in 1930. As soon as he reached India, he was arrested and imprisoned for a communist conspiracy case, the Kanpur communist conspiracy case. And actually his days in the prison, years in the prison, was actually molding the new philosophy later to be established by Roy and his loyal followers in India. And his continuous studies in the jail, and moreover his long term experience in the communist movement all over the world, actually finally culminated in the formation of a new philosophy, which today we know as New Humanism, Radical Humanism, sometimes Scientific Humanism or Secular Humanism. And it is a full-fledged philosophy. The attraction is that there are two things to be noted about Roy's philosophical position in the final stage. One is, he had bid farewell to the official doctrine of Marxism. Second is that he could base his humanism on modern science, especially physics and biology, that we will see in the continuing parts. So, what is radical humanism is in fact a total system of philosophy which completely disagreed with the spiritualist tradition of India, is one point. That is, we have our prominent Indian thinkers, Gandhiji, Swami Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and many others, of course, up to Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. We find the predominant stream of contemporary Indian philosophy is spiritualistic. And M. N. Roy, his radical humanism is indeed an exception to this common feature of contemporary Indian thinking. That is, Roy is an out and out materialist. And at the same time, he did not agree with several things in Marxism, especially the question of class leadership, or what is called proletariat dictatorship. And about such key issues in Marxism, Roy had his own criticism and disagreement. And so we can say that there are two things very, very important in the case of Roy's new philosophy. One is his disagreement with the spiritualist tradition and its continuation in contemporary India, that we can see represented by the Gandhian stream. And another thing, at the same time, he disagreed with Marxism. He dared to questioned the basic tenets of Marxism, including class domination, proletariat dictatorship. Even the philosophy of dialectical materialism was not acceptable to Roy, because he interpreted materialism in his own way by naming it physical realism to avoid the or what is called the misrepresentations of materialism. He wished always, or he liked to call materialism physical realism, because he could develop materialism on the basis of the later, that is the post-Marxian developments in modern science, especially physics and biology. So, he was able to develop scientific humanism, and it is indeed against all forms of fascism. That is more important. And on one side, Roy opposed religion. It is interesting to see that his opposition to religion it goes parallel with his opposition to Marxism. So, how it happens, we shall see in the succeeding sections. Roy's political stance in the days immediately preceding independence was quite strange and risky, we can say. That is, on one side, Roy dared to oppose the Gandhian path. That is, he could never agree with the what is called Ahimsa path of Gandhi on one side. And on the other side, you can see that he could not agree with the Marxists and the Congress socialists in India. That is, he had to fight with both sides, that is Gandhians, and you can see that in the meantime he had a short after his farewell to Marxism, he joined Indian National Congress for a short while. But the leadership of Indian National Congress could not accept the Royist effort to radicalize Congress. Gandhiji and his followers in Indian National Congress resisted Roy's effort to radicalize Indian National Congress. And the Marxists could never accept the whom they called the renegade. After his return from Soviet Union, he was branded a renegade, which is sometimes the word of curse in Marxism. That is, the founder of Indian Communist Party became a renegade to the same Indian Communist Party after he returned to India. And remember that how strong Roy was a fighter for freedom. Even after return to India, he was arrested and imprisoned for years. That too in connection with the Kanpur conspiracy, communist conspiracy case. So, in pre-independent India, Roy's position was indeed complicated. He had to fight on both sides with the Gandhians and Marxists. Anyway, in pre-independent India, M.N. Roy did not go back from politics. Instead, he became more and more active in Indian politics. That is by developing a new and radical political philosophy with its strong base in scientific humanism, and more important is that anti-fascism. That is, Roy and his humanist friends and followers became active in Indian politics by forming the Radical Democratic Party, the RDP. And later, after a few years, they dissolved the party. That is, the Radical Democratic Party was dissolved to form the Radical Humanist movement. And there is a philosophical problem with the party that we will explain in a later section.
Sir, now shall we discuss the basic tenets of new humanism?
Okay, then when we consider the basic principles of new humanism, first thing we want to understand, why is it called radical humanism? In what sense Roy's humanism becomes radical? For that you have to see both the critical and the constructive phases of Roy's philosophy. It's a very strong critique of both religion and Marxism. What Roy, his critique focused on is anything that makes the individual human being submissive. And Roy puts it as anything, the supernaturalism of religion, the class dictatorship of Marxism, any such system, we shall call them some kind of superhuman power or transhuman power, that makes the individual submissive to a collective ego. And precisely Roy used the term sacrificing the individual on the altar of collective ego. And this is sometimes the most fundamental tenet of radical humanism, that we can put it as the sovereignty of the individual human being. So, the individual is prior to any system, social or any other collective system. Individual is prior, and individual is the target of all reforms, all changes in society. But you can easily understand the position in comparison with Marxism, which is socialism, or an ideology that puts society before the individual. And in this case, you can see Roy's position is closer to Gandhism than that of Marxism, because Gandhiji also argued that only a just society can create a just individual, but Roy's position is not spiritualistic, it is materialistic. And Roy was confident that radical humanism can explain the existence of the individual, the potentials of the individual with reference to the scientific theories, especially the theories in physics and in biology. So, Roy could make a very beautiful synthesis between the postulate of physics, that is, the world is a law governed system, and the biological theory of evolution, that is, evolution is that ascending process of becoming, and all these processes on the earth are rooted in the world, in the material world, that is a cosmos or law governed universe. And from this background of law governed universe, the individual human being is acquiring the potentials and faculties. So, we come to the second most important tenet of radical humanism, namely rationality of human being. And according to Roy, human being is essentially rational. Stress the word essentially, because rationality is the essence of human being. But there is a difference. For example, with the rationalism of Descartes in Western philosophy, Roy traces back the origin of human rationality to the cosmos or the law governed universe. That is why Roy clearly defines human rationality as the microcosmic echo of the macrocosm. That is, the macrocosm, the universe is a law governed system, and the individual is a microcosmic echo. So, human rationality, or the ability to understand relations in nature, is nothing divine, is nothing otherworldly. It is a worldly development due to the process of biological evolution. That is, human being becomes becomes rational as a product of nature, not anything. There is nothing mystic about rationality of human being. It is only the biological heritage or the echo of the harmony in the universe. And we can also explain the third postulate, namely the human urge for freedom. Of course, it is connected with the human faculty of morality. Anyway, we have to take freedom separately. Again, you can see that human freedom is given a unique explanation by Roy. That is, human freedom is rooted in the biological natural life of the species. The what is called the archetype of freedom is nothing but the struggle for existence that is universal in the world of living beings, living animals. So, this struggle for existence, that is a characteristic of life in nature, becomes qualitatively transformed in the human being. That is, there is a level of, there is a kind of leap when we come to the human level of evolution, and that leap makes a transformation in the biological struggle for existence, which is mechanical. And on the human level, this biological struggle for existence becomes the urge for freedom, that is the human quest for freedom, which is indeed a continuation of the biological struggle for existence. And another important thing about Roy's principle of freedom is that he could successfully link freedom with knowledge. That is, human being in the pursuit of freedom also attains or adds to his knowledge new and new ideas. This acquisition of knowledge is indeed linked with the human urge or desire for freedom. That is, stage by stage, human beings detach from nature. They want to liberate themselves from the constraints of nature, and for continuing this liberation, that is liberation from the constraints of nature, society and any other thing, human beings continually acquire knowledge, add new and new knowledge and make it an ever expanding system of knowledge. That is the supporting mechanism of human life on the earth. And a third point to be noted is that his concept of morality is unique, because I told you that Roy did not like the term materialism, for mainly for the reason that materialism sometimes implies that is a negation of morality. That is, materialists are not not clear about the moral question. It's a complaint against materialists. So, Roy wanted to avoid this, and also he wanted to add the developments in physics to the concept of humanism. That is why he used the term physical realism in place of materialism. And so, he was specific about the question of morality. Roy argued that morality is not a divine faculty. God has nothing to do with human morality. And even society does not guarantee morality, because you remember that is rationality is a natural development, and rationality creates society. But when you go to Marxism, society is molding everything. Social life is molding your psychological life, your morality, your rationality, everything. But Roy said that rationality is determining your social life. You create a society, you create your moral institutions and moral ideas on the basis of this rationality. So, rationality is the essential faculty of human being. That is the basis of moral life.
Sir, will you please explain what are the political ideals of M.N. Roy?
Yes, M.N. Roy is above all a political thinker and activist, you must remember that. So, the whole of his philosophy becomes the basis of his political action actually. And he has made original contributions to political thought. That is of course based on his tenets of rationality and freedom. We have already seen that Roy's philosophy is essentially anti-authoritarian. It is recognizing more and more the sovereignty of the individual. So, his at one stage we have seen that Roy had formed a political party according to his philosophical ideals, that is the Radical Democratic Party. And without any delay, he dissolved the party because Roy and his disciples believed that a political party is indeed an authoritarian structure, is an institution that will demand the submission of the individual. So, they dissolved the party and or converted the political party RDP into Radical Humanist Movement, which he had the vision that the movement shall consist of enlightened individuals who can act as the guides, friends and philosophers of people, not as their leaders, not as their masters. And you can see that the crucial element in Roy's radical humanism or radical humanist politics is his idea of partyless democracy, according to which he formed the radical democratic movement. And it may sound a little bit strange how democracy is possible without party. But the concept of partyless democracy guided by enlightened individuals is the core of Roy's political ideology. And he put forth not only that idea, but he had a proposed definite scheme of organization for realizing partyless democracy. It should be based on, for example, cooperative economy. It should be based on organized liberal democracy, and there are different levels of organization, what is called a governmental organization, in which at the bottom level Roy had the vision of direct democracy, that is people participating directly in the process of democracy was his vision, and he had proposed the definite structure and organization of what we call radical democracy. And ultimately, what is the measure of the success of democracy? And Roy's reply to the question is very, very important. That is, a democratic system is measured successful according to the amount of freedom it guarantees to the individual member of that society. So, the most basic thing is the freedom of the individual, and party or class or even parliamentary system Roy opposed, because he believed that in parliamentary democracy, in due course the system will become corrupt and the system will become dominating, totalitarian over the ordinary people. And so, he opposed not only class dictatorship of Marxism, not only what is called theocratic governments, but also parliamentary democracy, what we call traditional, conventional parliamentary democracy, because he was afraid of all these systems becoming totalitarian and oppressive on the life of people. That is the position, and finally he had the dream of establishing what is called a Renaissance movement in India. He always had the dream of a new Renaissance in India.
Now we have discussed in detail the contributions of M.N. Roy. Now we will sum up.
The political career of M.N. Roy had evolved from the life of a national revolutionary, devoted to the cause of India's political freedom, to the top ranks of international communism, and finally culminated in the radical humanist phase. Manabendra Roy was successful in developing a full-fledged system of philosophy with its roots in liberalist politics and modern science. We have fused the terms new, radical, scientific and secular to distinguish Roy's humanism from other systems of humanism. Its core postulate is the sovereignty of the individual human being. Then rationality as the essential biological trait of human beings. And finally, freedom and morality as born out of the natural background and evolved through the human being. And Roy opposed religion on one side and Marxism on the other side, even though Marxism opposes religion and vice versa. He opposed even parliamentary democracy because he was afraid of any such organized power as detrimental to the development and freedom of the individual human being. And the radical humanist solution is partyless democracy, that is based on political decentralization and cooperative economy to ensure the freedom of the individual in society.
Now to assignments on new humanism.
In the form of assignments, you shall try. First one, bring out the evolution of M.N. Roy's political career. Second one is elucidate the grounds on which M.N. Roy had criticized religion and Marxism. Third one, explain how M.N. Roy had developed his rationalism on the basis of modern biology. And fourth one is bring out the basic tenets of new humanist philosophy. And finally, examine critically M.N. Roy's concept of partyless democracy.
Sir, which are the different reference books related to new humanism?
So you can classify them into the original works of M.N. Roy. To begin with, you can read Beyond Communism, jointly authored by Roy and Philip Spratt. Then his book is Materialism. Then M.N. Roy's other works are Memoirs, then New Humanism, a Manifesto, which is an important work to understand his philosophy. Then New Orientation, and most of these works are published by the Calcutta publisher Rajanda. And there is a book on his political ideals, that is Politics, Power and Parties. And finally, his classical work is Reason, Romanticism and Revolution. Science and Philosophy is another work. And there is a work called Scientific Politics. And the second set of books which are important for beginners is the works on M.N. Roy and his philosophy, written by prominent Royists in India. One is Radical Humanism, authored by V.M. Tarkundi. Then there is V.B. Karnik, another prominent Royist who wrote the work M.N. Roy. And there is a work by Ramendra that is M. N. Roy's New Humanism and Materialism. And you will get useful materials from websites. A very important one is published on Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Then there is an article on WordPress. The Bulletin of Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture has published an article on Roy. And there are many other useful websites of radical humanists which you can try for a preliminary understanding of Roy and his philosophy.
Thank you, sir, for giving us an enlightening session on the new humanism of M. N. Roy. Signing off, we will meet in another session.